Hey, good morning, everybody. You think that background noise has finally gone away? My name is Mike Heimos. I'm with the Office of Sustainability for the City of Columbia, Missouri, and welcome this morning. I know it's a little bit early, 9 a.m. for a PowerPoint, so I'm going to try to get through my 345 slides as slow as possible. Just kidding. We have a unique MS4 program here in the city of Columbia. We are a site-specific MS4. We have been under our MS4 for 20 years, almost 20 years. I've been with the program for the last 15. So the first 5 years, I'd have to say, the permit, we were in negotiations with the EPA and the local Department of Natural Resources, ironing out what our permit was going to be. And right around when I got hired was right around when we settled the disagreements and everyone agreed to how we were going to move forward. What makes our MS4 a little bit different here in Columbia, Missouri is the University of Missouri, which is the home satellite major university for the state, is here in Columbia, Missouri. And then the county, which is called Boone County, which is where Columbia resides in, and the city of Columbia are all permittees on one MS4 permit. So that means the University of Missouri, Boone County, our county, and the city of Columbia are all considered one giant municipality. So all three of our organizations meet monthly and we all work together and making sure we meet our minimum control measures. One of the things we're going to go over today is a program that I started probably about 10 years ago called Adopt a Rain Garden. And what I'm going to present to you today very briefly and kind of give you the larger infrastructure of how this program works. A lot of times when I've done this in the past, I show all these pictures of rain gardens, but I don't really explain the full program and how we pull all this together. What I'm going to present to you today is actually what we give our volunteers who adopt our rain gardens. And it's not only just our rain gardens. We have a huge volunteer core of folks in Columbia. We have an Office of Volunteer Services, which encourages folks to volunteer and adopt things, adopt the roadway, adopt spot. We have over 125 adopt a spots citywide, or I think 101. The number might be a little around that area. Those are just areas along the roadway where medians, roundabouts, where folks adopt the area, which is public right of way, and plant native plants, plant plants, take care of it. Then we have rain garden wise, the city of Columbia has over 600 plus rain gardens citywide, stormwater P structures. I usually use the word rain garden because it's a little easier instead of getting into biodetention basins and all those nomenclature of my job. Use the big words. We have over 600 rain gardens citywide. Of the 600, that's private and owned by the city. About 155, 60, I believe, the last time I talked to Public Works, are owned specifically and on city right of way, on the side of the road, city facilities, parks and recreation. Some, in some cases, a few of them are private and public and partnerships for adjacent land to properties. Of that, we did an evaluation when we were looking at this before we went into expanding this program. I did a citywide calculation of mowed areas for the city of Columbia. That included the maintenance of all of our stormwater infrastructure. The city of Columbia every 2 weeks mows 80 football fields. And of those 80 football fields that are mowed, about 20 of them are cut up into little itty bitty pieces and scattered all over the city. And in those little itty bitty pieces, most of that is our biodetention basins, our rain gardens, areas that are along public right of way, and mostly in high profile areas. And I picked that specifically, rain gardens for this program that were in high profile areas. You know, they weren't under a bridge, they weren't down in some gully where we were running the stormwater down there through a structure. So these are in high profile areas, parks, walkways on the side of the road, areas where we knew the public would see these, and we saw it as an education and opportunity, and outreach and education opportunity, not only under our MS4, but also to equate the public with what these are, what these infrastructures are. This is in our city ordinances. You are required to do this if you were on the public side and you are disturbing more than 1 acre of land. A lot of people don't understand when you start getting in the natives and you start going down the rabbit hole and you start talking about all these things, what the maintenance and care is. So we're using this also as an opportunity to educate about installing these yourself on your own private property, how these function, what they do, through signage and other things. And we use our volunteer program as an opportunity to educate about this, because the more people that know, the more information that gets out and the more receptive people are to these ideas. We grew up in a culture where everybody likes the country club look. They want the grass mowed right down to the edge of the creek. They don't understand why there are all these weeds on the side of the road and we're not mowing them down. So it's constantly in education with the public, talking about it, using every opportunity to let folks know there's a purpose for these. We're protecting our local natural resources, what stormwater runoff is, how it becomes polluted, how these structures work, how they reduce that stormwater runoff, how they reduce pollution in our local waterways. And for us here, and you all might be in the same case in Texas, I don't know, where your areas lie, what your environment is, but for us, there's water everywhere here. We have just within the city limits, which I'd say if you were here in Columbia, it's over a population of 100,000, maybe 150,000. That's what the student population. When we look at explaining this to folks and the size of what we're trying to do, like I said, we find it as a great opportunity to educate about several things, how this process works, what rain gardens are, and why we have to do it. So once a year, usually in March, we invite all the adopters and those that are newly adopting some of our spaces and some of our locations to our adopter volunteer meeting. So we use this as an opportunity to educate about city core vision and mission. We talk to the public about what we're trying to do. Next slide. We go through our core values. We go through the different things. We use this as an opportunity to invite all the departments when we talk. We usually have a turnout. As I said, we have 100 so of these spots. We usually have an 80% turnout when we have these events. And a lot of people like to talk, share money. We found these adopt a spot and these programs work very well with folks. Communicating and talking about different issues they face. Maybe they need plants at their spot. We let those that are doing really well with locations, let others of those know that maybe they could use some seedlings or some plants they may need. Next slide, please. Next slide. We talk a little bit about the mission of the volunteer program, and then what our expectation of them is for the program. Next slide. So we fit in our climate action plan. Our climate action plan, we got resolved 2 years ago, and we use this as an opportunity to explain not only how our MS formats, but also how our climate action plan fits within a lot of our other visions for the cities and our mission for the city, and how MS4 and stormwater plays a big role. What I was trying to get at before when we talked about the stormwater issue is water runs off your property. It just goes away. And most folks, when you really sit down and you start talking to them, especially when I first started my career here at the city and we go out and we talked about pollution prevention and good housekeeping, especially on the residential side, folks just didn't understand how this infrastructure worked. I can tell you, and I know this sounds crazy, but most people, when I went to talk to them, when they dump motor oil down in the storm drain or old salt left over from the winter or shove their grass clippings and leaves, they, honest to God, thought that water went somewhere and those things were removed. And once we use these as opportunities to educate. This is how this infrastructure works. This is where your drinking water comes from. This is where the water you recreate in comes from. We're a rural community. We're 100 miles from Kansas City and 100 miles from St. Louis. We have a lot of farms. We have a lot of infrastructure around us, and then we're an urban community. We're subdivisions, we're homes, we're the University of Missouri. So we have a very mixed variety of culture here. So making sure that message fits everyone and they understand their role, and it is very important to us, and it plays a big part of trying to educate about our climate action plan. Next slide, please. One of the things that we push with this, you can go to the next slide. That was perfect, where it says native. One of the things that we educate on is native plants, what they are, how they work, why it's important to plant them, how they help stormwater process into the ground. Especially here in the Midwest, we have very clay saturated soils. So native plants play a very big role in breaking up that clay soil and letting the water infiltrate down into the water table. And how rain gardens play a role in that is very important in explaining what natives are in that process. Next slide, please. We explain, the less use of fertilizer, less use of pesticides. They require less water. You don't have to work, you don't have to waste drinking water, and they survive our harsh summers and winters. And just how long it takes a native to mature. These are all things that we educate the public about and why we encourage them to do that. We do that in all of our programs, we can't force anybody, especially if they get in and adopt a spot, to plant natives in their spot, but we encourage the use of that. And over the years that we've done that, we've seen that come to the forefront a little more. And that's what we're trying to get people to understand is how these adopt the spots tie into our MS4 and protect our local waterways, and you're a part of that. And then the overall protection and the part of our climate action plan. Next slide, please. We get a little more into the area of Missouri and natives, and this is also done by our, since I started working with the city, we've hired a city conservationist, which I beat the drum on for years, Danielle Fox, and Danielle gives us part of the presentation. Next slide, please. So we walk through, you can go to the next slide. We walk through and we talk about the effects on our local waterfowl, on our local birds. We talk about the different things in the with our local insects, and how just planting these areas with natives is not only great for the environment, but all the things that it affects in that environment. Next slide, please. This is, again, because of our soils here, we explain to folks, how they root down when you plant mums, or you plant something that is you picked up at Lowe's, that the maturity of these plants as they grow takes some time, a couple of years in some cases, but once they take root, once they are in these spots, especially in these rain gardens or these adopted spots, they do exactly what we want them to do. They start breaking up our clay soils, and they start letting that water penetrate and percolate down into the water table. Next slide, please. We have a great group that we work with, Grow Native. They are a local organization. They are all throughout the state, and they work with different local nurseries, and in some cases big box retailers, to sell their native plants. And we encourage our folks to go out and purchase those plants that they use for the adopt a spot in the rain garden locations. Next slide, please. This is just most of this information I'll get to you after we go. This is their database that we use. We have a list, and we use this list off of here, and we also have a written list, which I'll give to you guys, that we give to our volunteers for where to buy and what they can plant. Next slide, please. This is, again, goes into a little bit of detail about how to plant them. Next slide, please. And again, this tells you where all the retailers are. Next slide, please. And one of the biggest issues we have is some of our spots, and especially not with the rain gardens, but some of our spots, people can pretty much plant what they want. And we have a very, very strong core of volunteers. I'd say out of the 100 locations, probably about 80 of them are very well maintained. Retirees are one of our best. We have a lot of retirees here in town, folks that grew up maybe on a farm or grew up gardening. And these spots appeal to them for locations, especially our rain gardens. They're more off the road. They're usually set back a bit. These areas become more adoptable, more friendly for families, groups like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, when we adopt them out. Next slide, please. we have, like I said, we have over 101 beds and 96 of them are adopted. So that's a 94% adoption rate. We do provide through our folks that are in the Adopt a Spot program a small stipend for their spot. Again, the $50 that we give them, we encourage them to purchase native plants. In some cases in the past, working with the University of Missouri and different local colleges, and actually one of our local high schools that has a greenhouse, we had paid them to grow native plants for us in their greenhouses. We paid for them. Then once they were grown and they were ready to go, we put an alert out to our adopters citywide and said, hey, we've got 100 of X or 200 of this. They'll work in rain gardens. They'll work in this location, dry, arid locations. They don't need a lot of water. Does anybody want them? So we're always trying to get our folks involved. We're always trying to give them opportunities to know that we're there to assist them. But most of these spots, once they're adopted, unless there are some major questions or someone needs some assistance, and staff will be made available, we give them their stipend, we give them their location, and we give them the encouragement, and we let them go. Next slide, please. We also use this as an opportunity to talk about using our drinking water to water plants. In some of our locations, we have water that is installed, especially, and it's a bigger program than I am in just the rain garden program. So I worked with the Public Works Department. As I said to you before, we did an evaluation to find out how much mowable area that we have. And we started looking at, as we did this along with our Adopt a Spots, our rain garden program, and other programs within the parks, is reducing the amount of water that's used there. And especially in the infrastructure that we're building and working with Public Works, we're looking at different landscaping alternatives, especially for our road, roundabouts and our roadside medians that are less maintenance and care for the Public Works Department. When you talk about the every 2 weeks, we mow 80 football fields. We started to do an evaluation and start looking at how much are we mowing, how much money are we spending here, how much staff time is needed. I'll give you an example. When we were doing the study, there was a 14-acre field that was located out in the middle of nowhere. And every 2 weeks, we sent 2 guys out there on big tractors, and they just went back and forth and mowed. When we started doing the evaluations and I started looking at these sites and then talking with the mowing crews and folks, I was like, this is our property, but why are we mowing it there's no houses around it. There's no subdivision. I mean, it just seems strange that we're mowing this. Couldn't we make this a pollinator zone part of our program? It just seems like a waste of staff time. And going over to the Public Works building, meeting with the guys that were sitting on the mowers, I was like, why do we mow this? And of course, the gentleman that was there 30 years ago, well, back in the 1980s, there was a lady that lived in a house. And she could see that, and she knew that it was city property, and she wanted it mowed because it concerned her about snakes and mice, and well, we've just been mowing it ever since. And I said, the 80s. And that's how it got up on the map of mowable areas. And they're like, oh yeah, she called all the time. And I was like, how old was she then? Well, she was well in her late 80s. So we're mowing this. We're spending staff time mowing this because someone complained about it 30 years ago, and we're still doing it. Those are the types of evaluations we started looking at. Again, that golf course look, how we've got to get everybody kind of past that idea of things aren't going to look always so neat and tidy. And again, these spots don't have to look untaken care of. It's just a change that people aren't used to seeing. And that's one of our biggest hurdles of this, is the education of it, is getting folks to understand it, is that natives take a couple of years before they get to full maturity and they start blossoming and blooming. These things take time. There's a purpose for these. There's a greater good to this. It helps protect our local waterways. It helps remove pollutants. It helps with carbon sequestration. It's within our climate action plan. It helps us meet the requirements of our minimum control measures for our MS4, which really, when you look at this, it meets our public education and outreach and our involvement, because we have everybody involved. It is part of our MCM2, our illicit discharge detection and elimination, because we're going out, we're finding areas intersections where we know there's a lot of runoff, drips, drops from cars. We're putting these in some of our areas where we're retrofitting some of our rain gardens and our infrastructure. You're looking at MCM3 for stormwater runoff control. You're looking at MCM5, pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations. We've incorporated these into many of our locations throughout the city, especially the Grissom building, our public works building, to collect runoff. And number 6, I use this all the time for our sites, to talk to our staff about why it's important and why we should have these things, and use this as an educational tool. I always look at these as educational opportunities. Next slide, please. We have a compost facility at our landfill, and we always make the compost available to our stuff. And again, like I said, we're always trying to make it easier on the adopter. Next slide, please. This is one of the things that I started, and it's gone gangbusters, especially with some of our rain gardens and our natives, because things can crowd other things out. We have a great network of folks that join in Facebook social groups, and somebody's got some extra plants and they want someone to meet them over at their spot, whether it's a roadside or a rain garden. They can dig up what they need and take it to their spot and plant it. That's worked very well for us. We've got some volunteers that are constantly potting stuff up and sending it out to the public, or sharing it with other people in the public and in the program. And next slide, please. And the other thing we've really pushed in the last few years, which really ties in and I think helps with the messaging, is tying this stuff into our local pollinators, our bee population, and our insects. How native plants play a very specific role in how our environment works. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the rain garden program, it's pretty simple. We already had the infrastructure set up for the Adopt a Spot program. So what we essentially did when I sat down with the volunteer office was like, these are roadways, these are spots that need to be adopted. When we did the evaluation, we came up with about 33 that I felt were in public right-of-way, that were safe areas, that I would take my children when they were young and take them to this area to maybe volunteer some time on the weekend. We also, because we don't have all of our locations that we consider public safe adopted, we have many times during the year, because we're a university town where we have big, huge organizations that are looking for volunteer opportunities. We use those opportunities as a chance for them to go out and get some of the other areas that aren't being taken care of. The one thing that's a big selling point, especially for many of the groups, when I get up and I do my presentation here during this to everybody at the event, is rain gardens pretty much can run themselves. We're asking folks to monitor them for us, because we do have to monitor them for our MS4, and we have an inspection program that staff does, but these are included within that. You know, making sure trash is removed. If there's issues and it doesn't look like the plants are making, or things are starting to silt in, you know, keep us involved in what's on in your site. And I always try to check in once a year of everybody that does the rain gardens on a list. How's everything going? Do you need anybody to come out and talk to you? Problems, questions? And most of our 33 of areas, there's about 15, I believe 15 was the last time I checked, were adopted them this year. Some of those 15, we've had people have adopted them for 6, 7, 8 years and have been taking care of them. And again, like I said, I did these in high profile areas, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Some of the areas that we've built some with signage, because it's always an opportunity, like, what is this? And I always try to keep that on our signage when we do things. What is it? What does it do? And how can I find out more information about it? I try to keep our signage simple and to the point, so people can see this here at this firehouse, this rain garden, this biodetention basin, whatever it is, go, oh. And when they see it somewhere else, they make the connection. When they sign up for the program, they get a sign that denotes that they are the volunteer and this rain garden is theirs and they're taking care of it. Next slide, please. We talk about how the infrastructure of a rain garden works. The biggest thing, the best thing I always do, I talk at the engineering school all the time here at the University of Missouri about these, is a rain garden essentially is a Brita water filter in the ground. Everyone can see that in their head. You pour the water in the top of the Brita water filter and it filters down through. Well, imagine a Brita water filter with plants planted in the top of it. That's it. That essentially is a rain garden. And if you're an engineer and you want to get fancy about a detention basin, there's a rain garden with a pipe in the bottom of it. But don't. It's not that complicated. Next slide, please. This is a really good example. And our firehouses, we have five firehouse locations that have rain gardens put them in, and this is one of our adopted locations. This was year one after we planted it, and I'm going to get a little bit more into this location. And this was a couple years later. So the maintenance and care of these, generally the group that takes care of this one goes about 2 to 3 times a year, which is another great selling point for this program instead of some of our other adopted spots where people are there every weekend or every couple of weeks. With the rain gardens, we're just asking you to maintain them and let the natives do their thing, pull back any invasives that might be coming through. And once we get the folks used to the plants that are planted in them, most of these and have planting plans, so we can give folks a basic idea of what plant they're looking at and what location it should be in, because not everyone's an expert in every plant that's ever been made, and really talk to them about what can be planted. You can't run to Lowe's and get a bunch of mums and put them in a rain garden. They ain't gonna fare. But once we get people set up, they pretty much they run it themselves. And I always get the panic phone call the first year we do this. We were down there and my kids or my mother or the group we were with, someone pulled this. Don't worry about it. It's okay. There are 4 more of them. They'll seed and it'll grow up. You made a mistake. No big deal. And we write most of this up in the contracts that are attached to that, what the expectations are for the people that adopt them. Next slide, please. We talk about litter and our problem as a city. We use this again as an education and outreach. What rain gardens do, it's not only the litter that you can see, but the drips and drops from your car, motor oil, heavy metals that come off your brake pads, those little bits and scrapes, that these serve a process. Next slide, please. You can go to the next slide. This gets into the program and how many hours and when you're supposed to work. You guys don't really need to see all of this. Just our litter control roadside, we have 73 adopters in the program. Expectations are to clean up 3-4 times a year. A lot of these areas are tied into the roadway where the rain gardens are. And some of these groups, because the adopted litter control adopted spots are different from the rain garden, start talking and working together, and they have actually on their own done their own volunteer days where they get all their groups together and they go out and take care of their stretch of road. Next slide, please. And we get into safety tips. I always give the speech about nobody's paying attention. Next slide, please. You can keep going. We go into the safety tips. It's very important. We're in a college town. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We get into where they do their stuff and the other things that they can do while they're on the sites. Next slide, slide, please. Next slide, please. I think you guys get the gist of the information that keep going, ma'am. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. A lot of political science. We have a great program, and how this ties into our volunteer program is we have a program called Ballistics. Next slide, please. Well, if the volunteers are assigned a spot, they're logged into this program, whether they're taking care of roadside litter cleanups, whether they're doing an adopt a spot or whether they're doing adopt a rain garden. Next slide, please. They can go into this. They can schedule their time. They can say what they did. They can leave us notes. They can ask us questions. Next slide, please. They can record their hours. They can record how many people were there. Next slide, please. Next slide. One of our other big events is Clean Up Columbia. We also use Ballistics for that. We have over 15 to 1,700 people citywide go out and clean the entire city, including all of our adopt a spot areas. The thing about the Ballistics, and the reason why I use this is a great tool for us when we have to report all our MS4 numbers, because I'm responsible for that in our partnership with the university and the county. So when we do our end of the year report to the Department of Natural Resources, by me keeping track of this and using our Ballistics, again, we talk about education, public education and outreach when you guys think about MS4s. So you don't have an adopt a rain garden program, but I bet you might have an adopt a litter program. How many people are participating in it? Are they picking up litter? How many bags are they getting every time they go? We keep all of this stuff in Ballistics and they report it. Well, this all goes on our MS4 because it counts. Even if I didn't have the adopt a rain garden program, every litter cleanup, every adopt roadside, that all of that counts for our MS4. A lot of the times when I have other folks call me from other places, next slide, please, about how we run these programs, how we do this stuff, how we record the numbers, how this fits in our MS4, all of these things do we're getting trash off the ground. We're maintaining our rain gardens. We're inspecting them. We're installing them under our ordinances. In many cases, you guys have these things in place already. It's just looking at them from the perspective of how can these fit into our MS4 as a reporting, and what reporting mechanism can we use? Like I said, we already had this program in place before they even hired me. We just added rain gardens into it, and it helps with the maintenance. Do we have all 125 of our rain gardens that are supposed to be maintained and inspected by the city, taken care of by volunteers? Is that ever going to happen? No. But of the 15 of the 33 that are adoptable, we have a constant record of the education and outreach process, the people participating in them, how we've tied this into our climate action plan, how it all fits into our MS4. It's a constant education and outreach opportunity for folks. I try to, over the years and working with the different things, is we've got 4 of these at our firehouses. I always try to look at how we can either retrofit something, and get them into areas where we can get staff involved and we can get the public involved, and we can have them as informational and educational sites. This is firehouse number 8. This rain garden, next slide, please. That was after our first rain. We were so excited. We had a local group of, and I always am looking for opportunities to get other people involved. We had a local construction that teaches young men and young women in the construction trade. And when some of these are built, I look at it as an opportunity for folks, for us to train the next generation of construction folks, how to install silt fence correctly. What is a rain garden? What is about retention? Why do we need sediment ponds on our plat for when we're building and constructing this neighborhood or this house to collect the runoff? Always looking at these as opportunities to educate the next generation, whether it's landscapers, whether it's local construction industries, local folks like that. The other thing that we've used is great with the firehouse locations that are adopted because of our MS4 permit and our regulations and what we have in our ordinances. As I said to you, there are 600 some odd stormwater BMPs citywide. Only 125 of those, 50, whatever, is owned by the city and maintained by them. The rest of all of that is the public to report, inspect, and maintain. And we get those reports once a year. But these sites have been great for us. And we've even had some of our volunteers go meet with folks that own local business buildings that have these installed and help them or help the landscaping company understand what the maintenance is behind them. So it's been a great program. It helps us keep in compliance with our climate, our MS4, and it also helps us meet our goals for our climate action plan. That's it.
Yeah, we have a question about Bermuda grass or Johnson grass, because those are invasives here in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any problems with those? Do you guys have any problem with those?
Yes, actually, we had a great project that was done along a local roadway here called Providence. It was over 3.5 miles long. It had has over 22 rain gardens along this bike trail that's along a major roadway between the two. And the contractor was trying to save money, and they were behind, and they went and they threw down zoysia grass seed all over the 3 miles. It's a constant thing. So is Johnson grass. And again, this is such a large program. We actually have a green infrastructure crew that I work with from our public works department. So in hiring our conservationists, I also encourage the public works department to we hire college kids in the summertime that go out and come back, fight, and maintain all the citywide BMPs, stormwater infrastructure, Bermuda grass, Johnson grass, and keep all the invasives out and knock them back. One of the biggest problems I had when we started this program 15 years ago was everyone's misconceptions about what natives were and how it all worked. You know, everyone was just like, oh, we're just going to go out, we just kill all the grass, and then we just throw down wildflower seed and you just walk away and nature takes its course. That one of the biggest things in the education of staff is there's some setup time to get these sites going, cutting back on the Johnson, treating, keeping the invasives out. But once we get the natives established, the maintenance on these sites are less. It's better than mowing every week. And fighting Johnson grass and fighting Bermuda grass is just part of the program. Any other questions?
I have a couple of questions. I'm from Louisville, Texas, from the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
You're from where?
Louisville, it's
Oh, Louisville.
yeah, it's a city in the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. So we recently did a streetscape improvement project where we installed rain gardens on the side of the roadway to capture the runoff from the street.
Yes, sir.
So so the soils for the rain gardens need to be, well draining soils, a mix of sand and organic matter. In our rain gardens, we had the hardy native plants, but we also had trees, cedar elm, and ball cypress, those trees, and
Yes, sir.
the contractor and the tree supplier, during construction were saying that, with such sandy soil, these trees would not be able to, hold on to anything.
Mhm.
So, but that's what was spec for the project. We ended up, mixing it half and half. Half of the design soil with the native soil.
Right.
Is that right? Or when we have trees in these rain gardens, like big trees,
Yes.
uh, how do we ensure that the trees have stability and also and they're good draining soils, because that's very important. Uh, you know, I, I I guess my question is about the soil.
So your soils are rather sandy in Texas, right?
More clay soil generally, but the design for the rain garden was mostly sandy, some organic matter.
Not being from there, I can tell you from what I know for us here. I try to always plant trees on the edge of the rain gardens so that they can root. They're going to root down and they're going to root out, depending on the species of tree. And what they do in your climate. The mixture that we use, I generally keep to a 10-10-80, which is 10% sand, 10% compost, organic matter, and then 80% local soils, and then mixed together. It just depends on the area. Our city arborist has been great in the types of trees that get installed and where they get put. And he makes most of those decisions for them. We have not had any issues with our tree. And of course, some trees just don't make it. With any concerns about them not taking root and falling over. Our problems with contractors are we give them a list of what needs to be planted, then they can't find what they need, or they don't want to go through the extra hurdles to plant it. So the next thing we know, the rain garden list is stuff they ran and got at Lowe's. So we're always kind of back and forth with them on just specifically what needs to be in these locations. And we had a contractor, when I mentioned the Providence Road one, we had to have him redo the rain gardens 3 times because he just didn't comprehend what the soil mixes are. So it's always a constant conversation and a fight. As for you guys and what trees and how they're root better, I think that has a lot to do with just where the rain garden's put in the soil structure and the type of tree that you pick.
Yeah.
And I more to your arborist there and get their opinion as to what they think would be best for that location, as they know your local area.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Mike, thank you so much, and thank you for that great question. We're going to go ahead and just for time's sake, we need to move on to our next presenter, and she may also be really great at answering some of the questions that we have at the end. So our next presenter is Lisa Treese. So Lisa is with KC Water. She is a registered architect with the state of Missouri. In November of 2012, she joined KC Water. Her primary focus areas at KC Water are green infrastructure, site design, monitoring green infrastructure maintenance agreements, and advising internal maintenance programs. Ms. Treese also leads the city's interdepartmental KC Green Infrastructure team, which works to identify, track, encourage, and support new green infrastructure capital projects in Kansas City. She formerly worked at Wallace, Roberts, and Todd and Viero. Ms. Treese holds a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture with a secondary major in Natural Resources and Environmental Science. She is a Legacy LEED accredited professional, a participant in the Green Infrastructure Leadership Exchange, and is a National Green Infrastructure Certification Program trainer. So Lisa, the presentation is now yours.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Happy to be here. And I enjoyed, it's been, Mike, I don't know if you remember, but we met many years ago. So it's fun to reconnect, at least over the web, and representing Missouri here pretty well today. So I'm with Kansas City Water, City of Kansas City, Missouri. And, I was doing a little bit of research to look at our, so Central Texas and, kind of what cities seem to be comprised there. I've got a brother-in-law who's from Abernathy, which is near Lubbock. So I was trying to figure out, how close is that to where he was? And I realized it's fairly far away, right? So they're in West Texas, is where they're from. And so it looks to me this group is Dallas, kind of that general vicinity. So anyway, but it looks like we're about an 8-hour drive apart, something like that, maybe 8 to 12 hours, depending on how big your region is there. So great to be here with you all this morning. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is, so when Krista asked for a presentation, she mentioned a presentation from 2016 that I had done for an EPA webinar. And she said, how about an update of that? And so this was a great opportunity to go back and look at that webinar again. It's been about 5 years, and to look at what's the same and what maybe have we learned even more from. So what you'll see today is the kind of next generation of that. And in the end, most of it's, most of the lessons we've learned, by 2016 are holding true today. But we have advanced a few things, and so it's good to see that progress and that forward motion. So this is what I'll talk about today. So basically, just briefly tell you a little bit about our program, and then I'll get a little bit more into really some of the details of when you're implementing these projects. So designing them and then also implementing and caring for them down the line. So number one, when we do green infrastructure, our main priority is to try to improve our water quality. So Kansas City is a river city. We sit along the Missouri River, and it's the source of our drinking water as well. So all of our water comes out of the Missouri for our drinking water, and all of our water eventually ends back up in the Missouri River. And then it travels on down to Columbia. So, we're one of many cities along the Missouri, and then ultimately tying into the Mississippi River watershed. And this picture on the right, this is one of our outfalls. Not really something we want to be perpetuating, right? Not something we want to leave to our kids and our next generations. And so our program, a lot of what we're doing is aimed at having it so that, maybe 10, 20 years, we don't have situations like this anymore, that we've cleaned up our act. So we have City of Kansas City, Missouri is a phase 1 MS4 community, but then we're also a combined sewer community. So we have a little bit of both. Our city footprint is 319 square miles, and we have a population of around 500,000 within our city limits. Our metropolitan area is about, it's over 1 million people. And so we have a lot of areas to deal with. And we're basically, it's like one step at a time, one foot in front of the other, we keep it going. So the projects I'm going to talk about today are mostly focused in our combined sewer area. They're part of our federal consent decree program, which is called our Smart Sewer program, where we're building green infrastructure in large part to capture stormwater before it has a chance to get into our combined sewer system and cause it to overflow, down the line. So these projects are helping us reduce the number of times that our system overflows. And when our system overflows, it mixes a combination of stormwater and our sanitary sewage waste into our river. And this is, unfortunately, many cities across the U.S. are dealing with this problem. And it tends to be the parts of our city that were built before about 1950 or 1960 are the areas where we have combined sewer. And then we also have our MS4 program, and that's a whole different group here at KC Water, and I'm sure they would have a lot of great things to share, and we cross-pollinate in our work. But today, mostly you'll be seeing things from our smart sewer program. So we do, our number one goals, protect water resources, trying to do cost-effective projects. And when we do these projects, we want to bring those community benefits along with them. So instead of just doing a pipe that buries in the ground and then leaves everything on the surface just as, maybe cruddy as it was before, we actually can go back in with one of these projects and create something that might look like a park on the surface. It's actually a stormwater treatment facility that's managing a lot of stormwater, but we can incorporate a maintenance path, which doubles as a trail, and we can create a space that is actually, supports people getting outside and healthy living in our communities. So just a brief look at our portfolio. This is just a little sampling of some of our projects, but our first two that we undertook, our Middle Blue River Green Infrastructure Pilot Project, was our first big one, and that completed construction in 2012. So it's been about 10 years that we've been maintaining green infrastructure portfolio, and every year we're adding several more acres of green infrastructure footprint. So our next really big project was Target Green Marlboro, which comprised about 10 sites in one of our watersheds. And so we created two kind of new stormwater parks with that project. One of them is it's an 11-acre stormwater park. And then some of our other departments partnered and built a playground there on the uphill side, and then a sculpture. So we've created some really nice amenities, and we hope to keep doing cool projects like this. So our latest ones that have been coming online, we've got some different, these were all part of our original consent decree to try green infrastructure projects in different contexts. So to try them in, industrial areas, to try them in downtown areas, and to try them in our more, suburban character neighborhoods. So a whole variety of different environments, and seeing what technologies do we have good luck with, and which ones maybe we build it and then we start to learn over time. Okay, let's tweak this, let's adjust, let's do something different. Okay, so now kind of into the meat of this presentation. So this is really just sort of a primer of different things to think about when you're doing green infrastructure projects. And, from my perspective as a landscape architect, one of the things that our profession can bring to these type of projects is to try to make them community amenities, to make them something that is going to be seen as an improvement, as an upgrade, or as a benefit. So we partner with the engineers, and we each kind of handle different parts of the equation and work together to create a cool project. So beauty is subjective, and Mike hit on the importance of the education. Everyone has their own definition of beautiful. Like he mentioned, there's that country club look, but then there's also, we are in the tallgrass prairie ecosystem here in Kansas City, Missouri, and so that has a very different look, and that is what our climate and our natural world is kind of already pre-calibrated to support. So we're fighting it every day that we're trying to do different things. So finding a balance, it's finding that balance between some of the more wild elements and some of the more artful elements of the projects. So most of these tips I'm talking about are going to make the most sense in like the urban and suburban context. If you're doing a project in a remote or rural area, then you have sometimes a little bit more design freedom or opportunities to, to lighten up on some of these tips I'm giving. But if you're in, an area where you've got a lot of people around, high traffic areas, people driving by it a lot, the expectations are a bit higher for what these facilities look like. So I'll go through a series of different tips, and some of these are just small design elements that can make a big difference on whether your green infrastructure facility stays in the ground for 10, 20, 30 years, or whether it lasts 2, 3 years and people are fed up and mad about it, and then someone comes and takes it out. None of us wants that outcome, right? We don't want to waste money that way. It's not good for overall, goals in these projects when we have projects that go badly. So some of the things that can really help, keeping your clean edges, things like short hedges or small stone walls, things like decorative rock. These images show some design elements that have really helped make these facilities more, I think, more appealing. And keeping plants from flopping into walks and roadways. That's sometimes the number one thing that can lead to calls, is when there's people trying to walk into a building and there's plants flopping all over the place and they're having to step around them and step over them. That's never a good look. We don't want that. Hardscape. So Hardscape is really the backbone of creating a space or creating a facility that's going to be seen as an amenity when we're in a context of, a little bit more high density area. So sometimes it's as simple as including some boulders of your native stone type to give it that sense of place and a little tie-in to where you are. Or it can be as elaborate as some of the things in these pictures where it's, detailed patterning in the hardscape. In this case, that's a permeable paver installation in Chicago. Or it can be things like, small boardwalks or stepping stones, flagstones. It can really help tie these into the landscape as a whole and make it feel like these facilities are there intentionally on purpose. Here's some more images that give an idea of, you could have a project, you picture in this right image, picture if that stone wasn't there. It would look more just like a roadside ditch, but adding that stone, as the water moves through, when it rains in that facility, it flows over each of those stone weirs and creates just beautiful cascade. And that particular site even has a recirculating pump, so they have a cistern and they can turn the water on and recirculate it. So it's a water feature when they turn it on. Geometry. So I can't stress geometry enough. This is something that sometimes gets overlooked when we're in a hurry to make sure that the engineering and the function of a facility works. Sometimes it can end up just sort of a blob shape, or, sometimes that is appropriate. Sometimes that works, but other times you really need to have something that creates actual design elements. So these images are some examples of, in the facility on the left, which is one of our newer facilities we just built, you can see how that boardwalk creates this interesting contrasting design element. You've got all these curves throughout the site, and then you have this one boardwalk with these different angles that comes through and just creates a really interesting site to visit. So I think a lot of it is not forgetting this classic design theory. So, we use it in design of other landscapes, but early on in green infrastructure, we were trying to get all these other things right, the ponding depth and, thinking about what plants will survive. And so some of the classic design theory got a little bit lost. And so the good thing now that these technologies are becoming much more familiar, it's easier to start bringing in those design elements back into the picture. So things like, curves that are intentional and dramatic. You can use an arc, sometimes a design, just by including one really well-placed arc shape can really elevate the design. And so, this is kind of my shameless pitch. Include designers in your projects. So if you have a team that's all engineers, if you can have a landscape architect on that team, or sometimes an architect, they can bring some of these design elements into the project and make it something that can have some lasting impact, have something that your community will value and treasure and keep around. So art. So this is another element of these projects which can elevate a simple site to something really special and something that's going to, resonate with people. So there are many examples of this out there in the communities that have been doing green infrastructure for a while. And one example here up in the upper right, that's our new facility where I was just showing that has that boardwalk, but it also has a few of these panels which show native plants and then their root systems, and it kind of has a ruler on the side which shows how deep those roots can go down into our soils. The lower project is one from, gosh, I'm blanking on it. It's no, that's not the right one. MSD in, it'll come back to me. Anyway, it's one of our peer utilities that some of our team visited some time ago, and they built a really neat, Northern Kentucky, that's what it is, Northern Kentucky. They built a facility where their design team had an artist that designed this really neat flowing waterfall feature to go around one of their stormwater cisterns. And then down at the bottom, it has this different engravings and really neat stone detail. And then those circular features you see there, each of those is a different material. You can see one is a regular pavement, one's lawn, and one has, deep-rooted plantings in it. And in those cases, when it rains, the water collects in those troughs that come outside of them, and you can see how you can maybe visualize how when it rains, the one with the pavement, the water starts to go into that trough really fast because that water runs off. The middle one, the lawn, takes a little bit longer, but it starts to then run off into that trough pretty fast. But the lowest one that has the deep-rooted plants, those actually, it's quite some time before any water starts to come out of there. And they have an audio tour that goes alongside with this. So just really neat, artistic elements that can help tell the story of the site. So plant selections. Mike hit on some of this already. In our projects, we do a combination. So we talk about, okay, the hardworking part of the facility, which is the basin or the lowest part that's going to be ponding and is the toughest growing environment because it fluctuates wildly from dry to wet often, that those are the areas where we really want to use those native deep-rooted plants. And then around the edges, we look at the context of the site. And if it's in an area where we're seeing lots of daylilies, in the surrounding landscapes, people's properties, then we'll include some daylilies. So we try to take some cues from the surrounding landscape in those plant selections. But part of it is, easing people into it. Instead of just coming in, all in with a big patch of, big blue stem, it's taking baby steps. And in this case, the plan for these is to keep them this composition, for our facilities. The images on the slide are from, other peer communities. So again, it's keeping in mind those classic landscape design principles. So thinking about form, texture, color, pattern, repetition, the things that make a planting really, speak to people, interesting to look at. But of course, it's really important that your planting complexity is tailored to your maintenance skills and budget. So if you have a brand new crew and they're not really skilled on plant ID, then you're going to have a really simple planting palette, at least to start. And also budget. So, that always, I guess that goes without saying. That's another factor that impacts how complex or simple your planting selections need to be. And so as a general rule of thumb, for these facilities, we look at a target of 75% native plants minimum, and then up to 25% of non-native plants. And usually those are located around the edges. So trees, there was some conversation about trees in the Q&A from the last session, and tree placement in these facilities does have to be done with care and, by someone who knows what they're doing. But there's a lot of potential here. If you have a site, for example, say you have a location where that there's not any plant identification skill or training among a crew, then sometimes maybe you could do stormwater tree planter. You know, this example, this is from a webinar I saw several years back, which basically in this situation, you move the water into the tree root zone. You prepare a special root zone for the tree with structural soil cells. There's different ways to do that. But then you actually, so it's functions in a similar way to a rain garden, but in this case, it's the tree and the tree roots that are doing a lot of your hard work. And it's an opportunity to, for spots where a rain garden wouldn't fit, this is an opportunity, you know, something to think about. We have at one of our newest sites, we have our first installation in our program of, there's different products out there. Ours happens to be one called Silva Cells, where we're trying this very technique. So very excited to see how it develops and to see how our trees do. And water features. So it's hard to find someone who doesn't like a fountain or like a water feature. I'm sure they're out there, but you know, waterfalls, fountains, streams, these are things that often can be soothing and you know, a little break for especially these challenging times we've all been in the last couple of years. And so there are all kinds of ways you can do this, from complex to really simple. And the image over on the left, so in this case, they've got a small spillway that was on a pond. And instead of just, you know, having like a concrete spillway, they took stone and created these little ledges that stick out, and that created a waterfall. So it's as simple as that. You know, in that case, probably didn't cost that much more to do it, but instead of having just a concrete slide that gets stained with algae and looks pretty horrible, they have this neat waterfall feature. So that's what good design can bring to a project. And sometimes it can be a facility that, you know, only is going to look like a water feature when it's raining, or for, you know, say 3-4 hours after it rains. And some of them could, you know, if you have the maintenance capacity and it's a high priority area where you have a lot of visibility and people that could enjoy it, that it could be worth using some recirculating pumps and a small UV filtration system for your stormwater if you want that water to be something that people can interact with. So the example up in the right, this is one of our facilities where we have sewer separation upstream, which brings the water through a pretreatment device, a hydrodynamic separator, and then the extra water goes down this beautiful cascading feature, goes over a series of limestone weirs, and when it's raining, and then for an hour or two after a rain, it's a beautiful waterfall. So, you know, that's something where this could have just been a pipe, right? But would we have created any kind of amenity? And would we have provided any water quality benefit or those other co-benefits that come with keeping the water on the surface? So this example down here on the lower right, this is, I think, the Oregon Convention Center. This one, I just think is such a neat example where they take the water that comes off the roof, it goes through this structure, which then lets the water fall down into this, you know, kind of, I don't know, obstacle course of waterfalls where the water moves through the site and just creates a really interesting facility and something that, you know, you can picture if it didn't include that element, it would still be nice, be a nice planting or foundation planting, but this elevates it to the next level. So where you have, you know, not every site is going to warrant this type of treatment, but some do, and there's some really great precedent examples out there. So into implementation. So that last section, I was focusing a lot on, you know, design ideas, and this section focuses on some of the bringing these things to implementation when you're trying to actually build these projects or communicate about these projects. So one thing we learned really early on is it's important that your renderings manage expectations. So we don't want to show someone like a picture like down there on the left where that we can't achieve that. Like there's no real planting that ever is going to look like that. And so sometimes, when we had cases early on where people would keep a flyer, and then later on they'd show the flyer and say, hey, so this is what you showed me this was going to be. And then they point to what we actually have, and it wasn't the same. So it's important to manage expectations from the start. We don't want to overpromise and then underdeliver. That's never a good look for anyone who's building a project. So part of it is, showing pictures of actual other projects, showing what they look like at the start. This picture here in the middle, that's a newly planted, very simple rain garden there. And you can see a couple years later, now it's not the same rain garden, but it's a similar one. Looks really different. But if people have the opportunity to see, hey, okay, first year one, it's going to look something like this, but then 3-5 years down the line, this is our target and what we're going to be aiming for. It can just help people not to feel like you're giving them a bait and switch where you're changing stuff and delivering something very different than what you promised. And then getting community feedback. So, this one hopefully goes without saying. It's really important to understand in each community that you're working in, what are the important things for you to know about the context where you're putting that project? Is there a big speeding problem? Is there a problem with litter? What are the different things that are going on there? And I think it's really important to offer different ways that people can give feedback. And this is something that our communications planners down the line have really driven home. It's important to give opportunities for people to also provide confidential input. So not to feel like the only chance they have to talk to you is in front of 50 of their neighbors who may not agree with them. Giving a chance to, so if it's an in-person meeting, comment cards. If it's an online meeting, giving them an email address they can follow up with if they want to send private impact or private feedback. Because sometimes, and I've seen it happen before where you have a group of 10 people and there's one person that's doing all the talking and everyone else is kind of sitting there like rolling their eyes like, hey, this guy doesn't speak for us, he just keeps running his mouth. So it's important to kind of pick up on that to try to get an actual pulse on, okay, what's important in this project? Are there any problems they're having that we can help solve through this project? And then are there any deal breakers for them? Anything that they really don't want to see in this project? And sometimes there are some infrastructure costs that can come along with these projects that maybe you aren't anticipating. So, if you're doing a project, especially in an area where there's, it's a retrofit, you're coming in it's a pre-existing site and you're coming in and doing a project, there could be some things buried under there that they don't pick up on survey. Or there might be, some broken sidewalks or a broken curb inlet right next to your facility. And sometimes you need to go ahead and fix all of it when you're doing your projects so that you don't have to come back 5 years later and then fix the sidewalk and a different department come and fix it and tear up all the stuff you just built, right? So it's important to consider those factors. So sometimes when we're budgeting, you have to take a little bit broader look and say, okay, are there any other things that we're not thinking of right in the vicinity of this project that are going to have to be repaired in 3 years? Let's go ahead and try to, let's take care of it now. And if you can't take care of it then, maybe you need to wait a few years to build your project until you can. So, these are these hard decisions to make because sometimes we get the motivation to do a project, but sometimes you have to ask, are we doing this the right way? If we wait a little while, can we get the funding together to do it properly? And this is on that same topic. So complete the picture. In this example here, and then go ahead and push advance. It should give us a little animation. Okay. So in this situation, this is, in our earliest pilot project. So this picture's from about 2012. We had 135 rain gardens along street, all in street rights of way. And in most cases, the sidewalks were in great condition, or very good, passable, no cracks. And in areas where they weren't, we replaced them. Now this is two homes, two frontages here. It was sort of an anomaly. It was in an area where most of the sidewalks were really good. Like on this block, they were in good shape, except this part. But the boundary had already been drawn of, okay, we're replacing sidewalks and curbs and drive aprons within X area, and this fell outside of that area. So the project was built, this got put in, and if someone didn't like our project and wanted to find the worst picture of it, here it is. You saw a few slides ago, there were pictures of these facilities. Some of them are really beautiful, but in this case, if we had put the sidewalk and redone that little piece of drive apron, think how much, it would look very different. So I encourage you, it's very tempting to say, oh, we can't afford it, we can't do it, but also think about, okay, a few years down the line, if this drive apron gets replaced, think of all the damage that's going to do to the facility too. And of course, maintenance costs and planning. So a project one of these green infrastructure projects can't exist without maintenance. It won't last very long. It won't be there very long. So to do one of these projects, you have to factor this in. Clearly defining expectations and getting that all hammered out during the design phase of the project. So you don't want to have it built and then you start thinking about the maintenance, right? I think everyone knows that, but then sometimes these projects happen and then, it's like, oh, well, I thought they were handling it. No, I thought they were handling it. And before you know it, there's no one lined up to take care of a facility. So really important to plan for that up front. And these ballpark figures, these have held true for us for about 10 years, which is interesting. And part of me thinks that's a combination of, as there's more contractors familiar with this, we're getting a little bit better pricing, but then at the same time, over 10 years, prices go up. So maybe that's how it's held more or less steady. But it's if you're doing a budget, that's a budget number you can use, and it's gonna look high to you. But if you're doing, a capital improvement and you're gonna have contractors or city staff maintaining it, that's, at least for our region, that's a reasonable budget number. And then staying communicative. So we don't just want to do public outreach during design. We want to continue it through construction and through maintenance. So there's a lot of ways to do it, but what we definitely don't want is when we go out to start excavating and we're digging a big hole, like you see the picture there in the middle. We don't want that to be the first time that your business owner next door or your homeowner finds out that there's a project coming. It's never a good way to start off a project with your constituents. So some of the ways that we do this, we use door hangers. Door hangers are a tool that, it doesn't seem to go out of style. It's always helpful if you have a situation where you don't have contact information for people, but you need to let them know something. The contractors, sometimes use these door hangers in our maintenance crews as well. Signage, Mike hit on this a little bit, but signage is really an important element down the line once the project is in maintenance. Having a sign that tells people, hey, this site's here on purpose, and if you have questions, here's a number to call. Or like on this sign example, some people like to use the QR code to find the website that has the form they can fill out. So different ways for people to reach out to you. And erosion control. So this is one of the big Achilles heel of green infrastructure projects. So it can really make or break the construction process and can be the determining factor as to whether you have to redo something during construction. So, the the SWIP, which I think probably most everyone here, if you have an MS4, you're used to dealing with SWIPs. You know, the SWIP is great for helping us keep that muddy water from leaving our site, but it really doesn't cover the muddy water moving around within the site, because that is more a function of your contractor's site activities within the site. So a couple things we've learned. It's really important to define on your plans or in your specs who pays for erosion control work within the site. And, you know, better yet, build it into your plans and show what you're going to be requiring. We've had situations where, you know, cover crop is specified, which cover crop is a great tool, but if your timing's not right, you know, say you've got this big mud pile in January, cover crop probably not going to do you much good, or at least not in our climate. It's not going to do us much good. So in a lot of cases, it's, you know, my recommendation is specify blankets, erosion control blankets, and key to use biodegradable, not photodegradable, because we've found that the photodegradable, it'll still be there 10 years later. You're netting, and then you're dealing with tripping on all that netting and it's catching in the lawnmowers. That plastic netting is very frustrating down the line. The biodegradable, you know, it's held together with jute and cotton, other natural fibers that do actually degrade within a year or two, depending on the product. So specifying the blankets, having those costs built in to the project, and then if it does happen to be the right season for cover crop, okay, well, maybe they can substitute that instead and you can save some money. But if you end up with a mud pile in January, then you're not sitting there going, hey, did you plant cover crop? You know, maybe they did put the seed down, but it's not going to do you any good to keep that mud from washing into the facilities that you're trying to keep mud out of. And then another really important factor here is optimizing porous pavements. So we see porous pavements used sometimes in places that don't make any sense. And we learned the hard way on our very first project that sidewalks are not very manageable spot to put permeable pavements. Now, there's always exceptions to these guidelines I'm giving you, but as a rule of thumb, parking lots are really the best place to use porous pavements. It's just the most optimal, cost-effective way. And I'll add to that, a parking lot that has a contributing drainage area that doesn't contribute a lot of mud to the parking lot, or a contributing drainage area that you control. So if you have a parking lot on one parcel and right next door there's a big hill and it's owned by somebody else and all their water flows onto your parking lot, that might not be a good spot for permeable pavement, because if that hill gets destabilized and you get a big mudslide, it's gonna clog up your system. So they're not a panacea. It's really important to use permeable pavements where they make sense. But if you have a place where they make sense, they can be great. My personal favorite are pavers, permeable pavers, like you saw in some of our other pictures, because they look like an upgrade. They look like something that, you know, your average person associates with something nice. Sometimes our other porous surfaces, like the concrete, we had someone in the pilot project early on say, well, why are you giving me this cheap concrete? You know, it's not cheaper, but it looks different. And so again, like if it's pavers, people don't usually say, hey, why are you giving me this cheap thing? You know, they might have other questions, but the pavers generally are accepted as an upgrade. And then pretreatment. So pretreatment's really important for these facilities. And pretreatment is basically, you know, sometimes it's as simple as a little spot for some of your large trash and some of your sediment to settle out. But it's really important that they're designed properly. So in our early days, we had this upper right picture. Our first project had these kind of little concrete bathtubs, which were supposed to function to catch sediment before it would overflow into the basin. But the problem was they were down at the bottom of the basin, so they didn't drain. The holes quickly plugged up that were in those little bathtubs, and we had a huge mess on our hands. So they didn't all turn out that badly, but about 30 of them did. And so retrofits were important to go back in and fix that. So we lifted them up, basically jackhammered out the bottom of those little concrete bathtubs, built a block wall a few courses high, I think it's 3 courses up, and then filled that with gravel with a few flagstones on top so we can scrape out the sediment. We got that idea from Omaha, so we've really valued the input that they've had on pretreatment. They've done a lot of really neat experiments with pretreatment. So that's, if you're interested in pretreatment, I'd reach out to Omaha. Andy Zatsko over there is an awesome resource. We again like cross-pollinate quite a bit with them so that we're not reinventing the wheel. So we're learning from each other and learning from our mistakes. All right, and so in another tip is just keep the pretreatment at street level. If you're doing something like a pretreatment forebay, or we use there's different proprietary systems out there, but rain guardians or different things, you keep them higher in the system so that the water always has positive drainage away from it down into your facility. It can really help you avoid these yucky situation. And intersection sightlines. So this is another Achilles heel that I see on some projects where the tall plants are too close to the intersection. And so then you get calls, complaints, hey, I can't see at this intersection. What's going on? So it's a little hard to tell in this image, but there are some taller grasses there in the middle that had to be trimmed. And, it doesn't kill them. And they do still put on a seed head and just grow back a little shorter, but it's extra work, right? So at intersections, the guideline that we use is 40-foot intersection site triangle. And then the plants within that area need to be 18 inches tall or lower from the top of curb height. If there's no curb, then 18 inches from the top of the road surface. So here's some resources. Now I recognize these links won't work right now during the webinar, but when Krista sends the slides out afterwards, perhaps if you're looking for information, you can click on these links and check out some of our resources. So we do have we have a manual, which a lot of the things I talked about today, we worked really hard to gather all these tips and include them in our manual, along with many other things, including construction details, specifications, things like that. And then we've got a few other just great, we think, great resources on our website. So encourage you to check it out if anything you heard today was of interest to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate that. And I know we are at time, but if everyone wants to stick around for maybe about 5 minutes, we will take some questions. So
I wanted to follow up on the question I got asked about the trees. So this is, and I didn't really answer his question. So my position is I'm like a project manager on most of these things. One of the things that we made a big difference for us over the last 15 years is engineers went to engineering school. They didn't go to plant school. So when we have projects like this, we bring in the Parks Department, we bring in the city conservationist. We talk about the plants and the trees and the types of soils and the mix. Yes, mostly we do a 10-10, 80, but it depends on the site. It just depends on the location. And that's why I bring the experts and the people that are on our staff. If I was an independent firm, I'd have an open relationship with someone that has a degree in horticulture and seek their guidance. And a lot of the times too, especially it's hard with the contractors, because that's where I get called in on is the discussions that no one else wants to have. Is it changed? The mix changed, the plant list changed, or where to get them. But that's how we kind of handle that.
okay. All right, so I do have a question from Paul Foley in the chat, and he asked, how well do the rain garden concepts work in low-income communities that currently adopt open roadside ditch concept for capture and conveyance? I think that question might have been for you, Mike.
I'm scrolling back up. So the question is,
the rain garden concept, the adopt a rain garden concept, how well does that work in low-income communities that currently adopt open roadside ditch
So are the adopters any different than any other? No. Just like any other group, uh, they fill out the schedule, they come, doesn't matter any. No, I've never had any issues.
Okay. And then Jennifer asked, Jennifer, I'm so sorry if I mess up your last name, Horbar. Do any BMPs exist for designing infrastructure around existing trees, such as large trees with existing root systems? Most rain gardens that she sees are created in areas with no trees previously existing, but some areas already have trees existing that they don't want to destroy with highly engineered features.
Yeah, again, I would bring in our arborists for the city. I would bring in the engineers, and that's a discussion that we'll be having if this is an area. And depending on what the stormwater infrastructure is too, how long will it hold the water? Is this a type of tree that wouldn't fare well in an area like this? That's why, again, I said, reflecting back to, it's just not me making the one decision or the engineer that's designing it. It's getting all of our staff in. And I say this all the time, I look at this stuff, it's no, times have changed. This is no different than building a bridge. We have millions and millions of dollars of infrastructure, green infrastructure. It's what I say this all the time in meetings. It's what we do now. It's who we are now. It's things change. What our responsibilities are. And bringing in the right people that have the background and know what will work and won't work in these areas. So Lisa said it best, so that it doesn't fail. So it doesn't become an eyesore. You've got to bring everybody in. You've got to talk about maintenance. I think that's a great thing. I beat that drum all the time, and I did for years. Just because you built it, you can't walk away from it. I know and I said my little statement, and Lisa touched back on it too. And it's a statement I said when we started this 10 years ago with Public Works. Everybody wants the country club look. I get it. Well, guess what? That comes with country club prices. We can't we're building all this green infrastructure, and it needs to be a maintenance to take care of it. But we also have to look at areas in which we're putting this stuff in and what that effect will be. And we don't want to kill trees. So bring in the right people to have that discussion.
Yeah, and you touched on the country club look, and it is important to education and communication is so important to making sure that our communities understand what it is that we're going for and why that's better than the country club look.
And Krista, Lisa brought it up too, which is another thing. It sounds so crazy. So we had this huge pollinator zone. It's along the local bike route. I talked about the South Providence. We were taking it offline for mowing. The guys just went out and they just, mowed, and there were these big square patches. Why aren't you mowing that? I said to the mowing guys, I go, why don't you go out and when you mow that, kind of make a shape, weave in and round off the corner and come back around and kind of cut in a little bit. They started doing that. Phone calls went away because then it became something that was supposed to be there. Why? Well, they mowed it like this. Oh, these must be flowers. Oh, it's a prairie. You've got to keep in those concepts, because when we cut it in a big square, it just looked like, I don't know, it started to rain and they left. And it's simple things like that you've got to follow up on to get the public for these. And invested in wanting to see these things.
Yeah.
And wanting them in their areas. Real quick story. This years and years and years ago, we did a pollinator area, Bonnie View. We turned like 14 acres in pollinator zone. First spring we had everything grew up. We phone calls from people, they wanted it done. You couldn't see anything. One of the major things that came from it was it was too high and someone could hide in there and jump out and mug you. It was a danger to the public. It's along a walking trail. 5 years later, our Parks Department went out and they were like, well, because of where this sits low, we want to burn this, but we can't, so we're just going to mow it. They mowed it back because it needed to be mowed back. It was part of the process. We got 100 times more phone calls, some of them from the same people that called and complained about it when we first did it. And so what did we do? Why did we destroy that? Where are the bees supposed to go? What about the local birds? So just within a 5-year period, people that hated something, it became part of their subdivision in their neighborhood, and they couldn't believe that we destroyed it. And then again, it was our fault. We didn't go in, as Lisa said, we didn't educate. We didn't say, hey, we were going to do this. This is part of the process of what you do with these native areas. So that, and again, it's education, it's talking to the public, it's getting staff involved, it's educating staff. I educate staff now with the Public Works Department. We've been doing this mowing thing for about 10 years. When we first started, everyone was against it. You're creating more work for us. I kept explaining to them, no, we're taking things offline. You're mowing less. Now I have to tell their supervisors to tell their staff to quit calling me, because all they do is call me and tell me places they want to take offline and make pollinator zones. So it's just a seed change. And like I said, this is who we are. This is what we do now. Green infrastructure is the same as a bridge. There's a cost to it, there's a value, and it serves a purpose. And it's a shift. The director of Public Works said to me, I feel like we're turning into the Parks Department. Well, you kind of are, in a way, but it's infrastructure, and it's green infrastructure, and it's the Public Works Department. And some of these locations we take very good care of because they're in high profile areas, and it shows the work that they're doing, and they care, and it always falls back on, look at how we're trying to protect our environment, look at how we're being innovative, look at how we're working with the community, we're working with the public. You've got to look at these things as attributes to the larger whole of your community.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing with us today. I really appreciate you guys taking your time, and as Lisa said, representing Missouri very well today. So to kind of wrap things up, I do have some COG resources. I'm just going to fly through these. We have our stormwater BMP library. It does touch on some green infrastructure and low impact development items. We have our iSwim website as well. And it does touch on some plants that are suitable for our area here in the North Central Texas region. We have our Sustainable Public Rights of Way Subcommittee. They're a subcommittee of the Public Works Council, and they are working on a best management practices guidebook, and it's under development. And so in another department, our transportation department, they recently held a blue, green, gray funding opportunity that has closed, but please do visit their website to stay in the know about upcoming opportunities to get funding to help bust down some of the silos between, the blue, the green, and the gray. And then we have that recording is linked here on the slide as well. And then we've also produced a green infrastructure guidebook that was published back in May of 2017. All of these slides will be sent out to everyone in a follow-up email. I have just one page of EPA resources. There are a lot of resources available on the EPA's website. I definitely encourage everyone to go check it out. Don't have time to get into them all right now, but these are just a few. And so our slides and recording today will be posted on our website at this link under webinars and training. And I will send a follow-up email out to everyone who registered with these links to that website, to the recording and the presentations. If you are attending today and you didn't register beforehand, but you somehow found your way here, we're glad to have you, and please reach out to me at my email address there on the screen, so that way I can make sure that I get you added to our follow-up email.
Krista, and
Yes.
if anyone has questions or wants more detailed information, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm here to help. We're all in this together. I like to fish. I like to hunt. I like to go camping. I like to go canoeing. I want my kids to be able to do that too. So if we can spread the word and help others, I'm here to do that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate it. There were a few questions we couldn't get to in the chat that we may see if we can get some follow-up answers to those.
Yes, we use goats. Someone asked that.
Here is the contact information for everyone who works on our stormwater programs. So if you have any questions about our Regional Stormwater Management Coordinating Council or any of the subcommittees, please feel free to reach out to one of us. We're happy to help answer any questions that you have. And so that will conclude our webinar today. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you so much for our presenters for sharing with us. We really appreciate them taking their time.